straight away, pave way for the conversation that we had lined up for you this morning. Actually, one of the big stories on the front page of the dailies this particular morning, captured on the Standard there, even as the debates continue following the handing over of the reforms on the report on the police reforms by retired Chief Justice David Kenani Maraga last week to the head of state. And joining me in studio to have this very important conversation, I have a panel of three gentlemen, and sitting on my far right, immediate right, we have Demas Kiprono, who is the Executive Director, ICJ Kenya. At the center, we are having Dr. J.M. Waiganjo, Commissioner IPOA. We are also having this morning George Musamali, Security Analyst. We appreciate your time. All right, and Demas Kiprono is the Deputy Executive Director of ICJ Kenya. Of course, thank you, gentlemen, once again for creating time for us this morning. We just want to, sort of dissect the report that was finally handed over to President William Ruto last week. I remember before this official handing over, we had this conversation sort of like to set the pace for what was to happen. I had a privilege to host you in studio, Musamali, and also Demas Kiprono. And we're also glad that you join us today, Dr. for this. Let's just, first of all, begin this conversation by getting a cocktail of your opening remarks with regards to whether this report, having looked at it or even having had the president himself speak that day, and even the chair of that particular task force talk about what they've been able to achieve. From where you sit and in your analysis, did you feel like the mandate that was given to this particular task force was fully delivered to the nation? I'll start with you, Demas.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to commend the task force for really bringing out certain issues that were glaring. And so, as much as we may not agree on everything that is in the report, because I think in some areas they did not go far enough. I think their hand was in the pulse properly and diagnosed certain glaring issues within the National Police Service that have been a challenge to all Kenyans. And they properly looked at the relationship between the National Police Service and the National Police Service Commission, the role of the Internal Affairs Unit. I did not think that they went far enough to diagnose the systemic corruption and systemic abuse of Kenyans' rights by the National Police Service. Mm-hmm. However, yes, they were in the right track, and we look forward to full implementation of these recommendations. Right. In some areas we might not agree, because as much as they rightfully diagnosed that the National Police Service Commission had given up its mandate a long time ago, is the right thing a negotiated exit, or is the right thing a further interrogation as to why they went that way? And perhaps through a tribunal, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where you have individuals who've been given a mandate through the Constitution to protect certain institutions, certain rights, and then they take it upon themselves to surrender that mandate, which means that they've betrayed the sovereign people of Kenya. And so are we just going to allow them to get a negotiated exit, or should we find out more?
Demas, he's talking about political, that kind of a political muscle that is needed to be able to implement some of these, recommendations. And I'm here asking myself, what else is needed other than the head of state really taking this head on and saying that he wants to? Actually, when he came into power, one of the immediate things that he spoke about was exactly that. And I wouldn't say it's President William Ruto alone. We've seen this with the previous regimes. Every time we have a new head of state, we almost immediately expect that there's going to be reforms in several institutions. Key among them is the police service. Yes. Every time after election. So what sort of political goodwill are we looking for, or what else is needed?
Well, talking about politics, we promulgated a new constitution in 2010, And the laws that created the different organs that are now comprising what we know as the police, the Independent Police Oversight Authority, the National Police Service Commission, the Independent National Police Service, were enacted in 2011. But by 2014, we already had laws passed by Parliament that were gutting some of these independent powers that the National Police Service had, that the National Police Service Commission had. Key among them was the power to competitively appoint the Inspector General and his deputies. In this report, we see that the task force recommends that we go back to that model where the Inspector General is publicly vetted, is selected among people who apply, basically going back to what the law was originally. And you can tell that this was the first thing attacked because someone somewhere was not comfortable with the powers that had gotten away from the executive. This is what allowed a person to transfer a police officer overnight, telling them you'll go to the north or something like that. And so we are seeing a manifestation of, yes, we have come to a point where we need to interrogate how our policing works. But the answers are obvious. The culprits are here, the ones who passed those laws in the guise of fighting terrorism. Yet, there was no real issue among the relationship between the executive and the command of the police. The police reforms demanded an independent police service, operationally and financially. We have seen attempts by the current regime to give the police financial autonomy, which is very important. But these are the things that were fought tooth and nail. And as we say now we've seen the recommendations, but do we have that political wherewithal to say, yes, now we need a police that even if we have maandamano, even if we have issues of someone saying something that is politically incorrect, will the police now come in to be used as a hammer? Will we have an Inspector General who is beholden only to the regime and not to the Constitution? Because that is what happened. And remember that the first Inspector General and the deputies were hounded out of office. Yes? Because there was that feeling that this is too much power for this institution. And that institution was also starved. And so even if you look at now the National Police Service Commission, are we saying that because it is alleged that the National Police Service Commission acquiesced its powers to the... It was usurped by the commanders. By the commanders. The commanders sit in the National Police Service Commission. So we are indicting in the commission, yet we are letting other people off the hook who were also party to the problems that we are seeing. And so there's a lot to interrogate. Let us hope that this time round the political will is sufficient, because when we have a good police, we have a safer country, everyone is happy. Yeah.
Do you think there's a nexus between the welfare and the, should I call it the bad manners or whatever that we see? Because corruption, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and just abuse of human rights, some of the issues that people have complained about with regards to...
These issues all feed into each other. Yes, because even evidenced by the police vetting that was done during the Kavuludi's period, you found that there is a cadre of police officers who are doing extremely well, obviously because of extortion and corruption. So there is a lack of fairness in recruitment, in transfers, in career progression. And so it creates room for a person to be disgruntled, to be stressed. And this coupled with normal policing work, which for an officer may may involve internalizing certain domestic issues that happen within the community. Internalizing a murder, someone has been murdered, you are the one investigating, then you have to go and act as a witness. You know, these are things that weigh upon you. Then now couple that with bad living conditions, that you're living with your family, with another family in the same house. And that's why we've had a lot of mental health challenges in the last few years, dealing and then leading to a lot of murder suicides. But that notwithstanding, even the police vetting that we had during that time was only looking at financial probity. It was only looking at, do you have money that you're not supposed to have, right? It did not look at officers' suitability. It did not look at their human rights records. And so, as much as we did vetting, we did not go far enough to ensure that we have officers that deserve to be serving Kenyans. The current task force has recommended that there is vetting above the level of SSPs, which is welcome. But what criteria will be used for this vetting? And also, I think we need to extend that to any officer that wants to be promoted needs to go through vetting. And so we have to figure out how to do that, because we are in a situation where I am telling you, if you are a business person in a community, every day there are 2 officers who will come to your shop and they will take money from you. I don't know what that money is usually called, facilitation or something. But this is happening every day. And so this is the issue we're talking. How do you solve that issue? And I made a presentation before the current task force, and this was one of the questions that was asked to me directly. I don't know the answer to that, but we have come to a level where even culturally, the police is in a certain state that may need an overhaul.
And you talked about a human rights record, track record.
Yes.
Do we have a way of establishing that even in records? How do we get to gauge that particular?
I would imagine that in future we should have a database from IPOA, from internal affairs, and from even the station level that speaks to what complaints have been tabled against an officer. What challenges has this officer, disciplinary challenges has he had with his superiors? Because what we find is we have a task force report that has glossed over the reason that we have a national dialogue right now. We have a national dialogue because of what happened during the Maandamano this year, and it is a replica of what happened in 2017. And so perhaps we're not internalizing the problems that we're talking about. So it is financial, it is political, it is internal in terms of how promotions are done, how recruitment is done. And now, coupled with that, now we want to say that National Youth Service will be now the main source of police officers. Yet, if you look at the recruitment of National Youth Service right now, it is where people with connections get a certain chunk of people. Now, if you're important, you'll be told, now we can give you 10 NIS officers to get in there. Now imagine that is now going to be the pool of officers. It is going to take us back to the point where we had a tribalized police service, where we had officers who are there because they know someone. I respect the National Youth Service. I think it is separate from the National Police Service. Its recruitment should be separate. The National Police Service is a security organ with certain obligations that touch on everyone's right to life, right to property, and all other human rights. Yeah. It is not a joke that we now want to say that as long as you proved yourself in NYS, now you can enter into the National Police Service. But I believe the task force has said that there needs to be a demarcation between the Internal Affairs Unit and IPOA, and they've said that the Internal Affairs Unit will only deal with disciplinary issues. Yeah, yet now issues of criminal in nature are the mandate of IPOA.
Yes, Demas, you had something to say, and I know Musamali, you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yes. If you look at the text that created the policing as we know it in Kenya after the 2010 Constitution, it was meant to be professional, accountable, and human rights compliant. That's number one. Number two, it was meant to police in a democratic manner. Policing where the people, they seek the legitimacy from the people instead of imposing themselves on the people. And one of the tools for this was community policing, where the officers, the OCS, and at the county level, they seek legitimacy from the people by consulting them in terms of policing. And in our work, the officers we see implementing community policing where they engage with the public with a respectful manner. You realize that even during incidences such as Maandamano, they would be able to escort the people to the streets and then they go back and life continues. But when the officers act as this arm of government that is just there to extort, to punish, to arrest, is a whole other issue. And we had mechanisms for community policing. What happened to it? We turned it into something called Nyumba Kumi. Nyumba Kumi is sort of a Tanzanian model of basically encouraging people to snitch on each other. It is encouraging people to know each other and to say whenever they see something wrong. But community policing is encouraging policing where people discuss. The community discusses whenever there's a security issue in an area, whenever they can tell that if you walk here at a certain time, you feel comfortable enough to go and tell the OCS that we think there's a problem here. And so, and even when there is some sort of crime, and you know crime usually becomes incremental. You know, an officer can actually find you doing something wrong and choose to warn you and forgive you. You know that? When the officers know the community, now they go into alternative justice systems sometimes, tell the people, you see, we have noted you, please stop this. And in fact, the community would be backing that decision, and you'd find that there's less crime because the police know the people. There's less antagonism between the community and the police. We've lost the plot on community policing, yes, yet we have a statutory mandate to do community policing. And I think basically we have allowed ourselves, we go back to the issue of welfare, of command, yet we have documents, guidelines on career progression, guidelines on sexual harassment, guidelines on gender-based violence that we have just discarded or failed to fund. We had the county policing authority, right? That has never been implemented. It has never been implemented, which was supposed to now be a mechanism where even the county government and the national government through the police come together to deal with the issues that happen within that community.
To give a chance to our panelists just to give us the final remarks on this conversation. I'll begin with you, Demas.
Well, yes, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the task force for really looking at the issues that they were mandated to look at. It is important to have a professional, human rights compliant, accountable police service as the Constitution demands. There are so many programs that we have done in the name of policing that have not been implemented, and they've not been implemented because of the ills that are in, or the adverse interests that are in the police. And as I part, an example is the digital OB, which records every complaint, every person that is booked. We know the nature of what happens in weekends in police stations where people in the streets are booked only to be released after giving bribes. This would have saved that situation. But as much as the pilots were done, it was never implemented.